Okay, so now that you've put your 4 Timberland blocks together, we're going to go ahead and add our sashing. So the sashing is what connects all 4 of your blocks together. I went ahead and did one for you, and if you'll notice on this one, I'm pressing my seams to my sashing. And you'll want to remember that as we put this block together because you want to nest your seams. Okay, so we did that one. Let's do the top 2 together. And remember which order you're going in. So right sides together, especially if you used a print. And you're just going to line up your sashing with your block. And again, all of your cutting measurements are in your pattern. And then this is where I like to pin, and I use a lot of pins to secure it because sometimes with these smaller pieces, the sashing will shift. Okay, so put a pin there. We'll put a pin in here. And then I pin at an angle along this line of, okay. Put a few pins in every inch or so, whichever you're comfortable with. You might not even need to use pins. I just like the extra security it gives me. And then I leave a little bit of room up here at the top so when I go to actually sew, I'm not hitting a pin right at the very beginning. And that was a little crooked. Okay, so now we're going to take this to our machine. Now I've switched out my needle to a regular sewing needle, and I've increased my stitch length, so just remember to do that after you've pieced your blocks. And I'm still using my 50 weight thread. And I did attach a 1/4 inch foot, and this will just help keep everything consistent. Let's get that in there and get it started. You don't really necessarily need to backstitch, it's totally up to you. We're going to be connecting these blocks together, so everything should nest pretty well in the seams. And remove the pins as you go. Okay, and then I just kind of like to put my finger on the very bottom there to hold everything together and stitch off. Okay, we'll remove our extra pins. This is where I like to trim any loose threads. So use our snips for that. Then we're going to take it to our iron. And again, we're pressing to the green side or our sashing side here. So just set our seams. And then just gently roll that back. And we're pressing, not ironing, because we don't want to stretch out the fabric. And you can use a little steam this time if you want, because you've removed the paper. Okay. So now we're going to add our other block. Remember, right sides together. Okay, we're just going to line everything up. What I like to do is kind of flip this over. My sashing side facing me to line everything up. Okay, make sure our blocks are pretty lined up. That looks really good. And now we're just going to add some pins. Okay, adding at an angle on the line that we're sewing on. Leaving a little bit of room up here at the top so we can get started. Let's go to the machine. Moving the pins as we go. Still sewing with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Remove our extra pins here. rid of this extra thread. Okay, set our seam. Again, we're pressing this back to the sashing side. So we're just going to roll this back. Make sure everything's nice and flat, and then give it a good press. Okay, so now you have your top and bottom sections all ready to go. So now we need to do our middle sashing, which is here. Okay, so first you're going to add the cornerstone to one side of the sashing. Right sides together, pinning in place. Okay, and I'm just going to give myself one little pin here since this is a smaller block. Looks pretty good, everything's still lined up. Take it to the machine. Sew your 1/4 inch. Move your pin, hold everything in place. Okay, take out our knee pin and remove loose threads. Okay, so because we pressed our seams to our sashing side, for this, in order for our seams to nest so that it's all seamless, we're going to press to the darker side of this, or to the cornerstone block. So you're going to go the opposite of what you did the first time. So we're just going to roll this back. And what this will do is, because your seam is this direction, when you go to add this one, your seam is the opposite direction. And so that should have them nest really nice together. Okay, so we need to add one more. Okay, just make sure everything's lined up. Flip it over, make sure everything checks out on this side. Okay, and we're going to pin this in place. All right, we'll sew this down. Remove our pin. Okay. Remove our pin, any loose threads. Again, we're going to roll this back so that we can nest our seams. And this is when you want to make sure that you press and not iron, because again, you don't want to stretch this out. Nice and crisp. Okay, so now you have your center sashing and you have your top and bottom pieces done. So we're going to connect these together. And it doesn't really matter, you can go top to the middle or bottom to the middle. It's totally up to you. Just remember which direction you're going in. And then you line everything up. Line up our edges, pin in place. Pin on an angle on that edge every inch or so. I also try not to pin in any sort of seam, so wherever there's a seam that meets, I wouldn't pin in there. I would pin around it. That just reduces some bulk when you go to sew through. Okay, and now we're here where our seam should nest. So everything should lay nice and flat, and you sort of see you can have a little bit of a flap, if you will, on each side, which is our seams. And we're just going to make sure that everything lays nice and flat. That feels really good. You can also check it when you go to sew. Put a pin in. Same thing on this side. We're just going to make sure our seams nest. That looks pretty good. Maybe I'll put a pin in on this side as well. Okay, and then just keep pinning down this edge. Okay, let's take it to the machine. Removing the pins as you go. Still using our 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then I like to stop right where my sashings are going to nest together, and I just kind of pick it up and make sure everything still looks really nice and nested and flat. And then I kind of just hold it, and then I stop, pull my pin out, and do the same for the next piece. That looks pretty good. Hold that guy in place. Okay, remove the pin. All right, hold the very end and then make sure everything stays together. All right, looks pretty good. So let's remove our pins, get rid of our loose threads, and then kind of give ourselves a check before we press it to make sure everything nested. And that looks really good. And you can see where we nested those seams. Everything lines up and is straight. So let's give this a press. There's a little steam here. And then we're gonna roll this guy back. Gently rolling back so we don't stretch it out. And give this a good press. A little bit of iron, a little bit of steam. Okay, now we need to add our bottom piece. Let's see, I caught a loose thread here. Let me just catch that real quick. Okay, so the same thing that you did for the top when you added the middle sashing, you're going to do for the bottom. So we're just going to flip this guy over. And then I like to line it up with the sashing side facing me. I find that's easier for me, but whatever works for you. You're just going to line up all your blocks. And we'll see how we're doing as far as nesting goes. That looks really good. Pin everything in place. The pin didn't quite want to go in for me. Okay, there we go. All right, now we are going to go every inch or so along this edge with a pin on an angle. Making sure we don't hit. Okay, so now we'll take this to our machine. I'm going to put one more in just in case. Okay, we're going to sew this guy. Remove our pin. I like to start and stop as I sew, only because that gives me a little bit more control. Sometimes if you're going super fast and you might sew over a needle, or you might miss a point, or you might get your seam allowance wonky. All right. Now we'll just remove the extra pins that we added for security. Roll this guy back after we remove some threads. Oh yes, those look really good. And we didn't lose our points, so that's great. So let's press this guy back. Set our seams. Okay, and then roll it back. I like to start in the center, kind of just use my hands to make sure everything gets rolled back. Okay, I'm gonna give it a good press. Use a little bit of steam. All right, so your quilt top is almost done. Now you can bind it as it is. However, I'm gonna add a top and a bottom border. I think it helps to frame the little Timberland pattern. So let's do that. We're gonna do our tops and our bottoms. Okay, just flip this guy around here so I can pin it in place. And similar to how you did the sashing in between the blocks is how you're gonna add your borders to the tops and the bottoms and the sides. And if your sashing is a little long, that's okay. You can trim it at the end. So mine's a little bit off, and that's okay. So we're gonna pin this in place. Pin it in place in a couple of places. Yeah, mine's off about 1/8 of an inch, and that's totally okay. Right, so. And we're not nesting anything for the top and bottom, so that's really good. You don't have to worry about that. It's pretty much a straight shot from side to side. And then remember, we're gonna leave a little bit of an opening there so we can start our stitching. So let's go to our machine. Make sure everything's lined up. And you're just gonna sew. Remove the pins as you go. Keep everything nice and straight and flat. Okay, and we're at the last little section here, and again, we're just gonna hold it with our fingers. We're not gonna pull or tug with our fabric. We're gonna just let the machine pull the fabric through. And there we go. Okay, so let's remove the extra pins. And let's flip this guy back to see if we got our points. Oh my goodness, look at that. That looks so good. You can see we still have our points on our trees. That's awesome. So let's cut out some extra threads there. And then we're gonna go to the iron and press this back. Give it a little steamy steam. And then roll it back, starting in the center, working your way out, just to make sure you catch everything. And we're pressing, not ironing, because we don't want to stretch anything. Using a little steam. Okay, so now let's add the bottom section of our sashing border. Okay, so again, we want to line everything up. And again, if it's a little long, that's totally okay. You can trim that or catch it in the side border. We're not pinning into any of our seams because that'll be bulky when we actually go to sew it. So you want to make sure you miss your seams. We're not nesting anything on these borders, so that's nice. Okay, so let's take out the pins. Give this a good check to see we're all good. Yep, do a little finger press. And then we'll take it to the iron and press it back. Set our seams. Okay, so now let's add our side sashing borders. You can start on either side, doesn't really matter. Keeping everything nice and flat and straight. Okay, remove our pins. Cut any loose threads. And this is where you can go ahead and trim up that little bit of sashing that's extra with your rotary cutter, just keeping it straight with the rest of the quilt. Okay, we'll finger press this back, see how we look. We look pretty good. Okay, so we'll give this an iron and press it back. Set our seams, a little steam. Okay, now we have our last section to add. That's our sashing border on the other side of our quilt. Similar to the other ones, just grab it, line it up. Keeping everything nice and straight, removing your pins as you go like we did with the others. Let's remove our extra pins. Cut off some loose threads. Get rid of that excess. Okay. Finger press this back. We look pretty good, so we'll take it to the iron and press it. And this is about the time you're done. That's the last sashing border. You want to give the quilt top a good press. Okay, so we'll start in the middle, work our way out. Use some steam. Make sure everything stays nice and straight. Get all the wrinkles out. All right. And there you go. There's your Timberland paper pieced quilt top. So next we're going to explore how to put the quilt sandwich together and start our machine quilting.